Hi, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live series on the release of the ISM Report on Business. My name is Dan Zeiger. I'm a senior writer and copy editor for Inside Supply Management, which is Institute for Supply Management's member publication. And we hope you had a happy Thanksgiving and are excited to have you join us today. The release of the Manufacturing PMI for November revealed a reading of 48.4%. That's the eighth straight month of contraction. But the composite index came in a little bit higher than expected, and many sub-indexes moved in the right direction, including potentially encouraging developments on demand and inventories. Also, there should be post-election clarity for businesses on what the policy and regulatory environment is going to look like in 2025. So there's a lot to break down, and lucky for us, I know just who to ask about it. He's Timothy R. Fiore. He's the chair of the ISM Manufacturing Business Survey Committee. Good morning, Tim, and just what stood out most to you in the November report and as we head into the end of the year?
Yeah, hi, Dan. Hi, everybody. So a good lead in. It's like, wow, we finally got to a little bit of clarity after a couple of years of a lot of confusion and opaqueness. And that clarity occurred with the election. And, you know, we've seen a marked impact on our PMI already. We beat expectations by a point. The economic community thought we were going to come in at 47.5, something like that. We came in at 48.4. And before I get into the detail, I just want to point out here that if the supplier delivery number had been what it had been a couple of months ago, we probably would be 49.5. The reason I'm bringing that up is that our number went up last month primarily because of hurricanes and port strikes. So of course, the month later, you're going to be faster, and we are faster. But I would think that in December, we'll probably get back to 52, 54, which will add a point to our PMI number. So it would have got us to 49.5, much earlier than what I had thought. I think last time we talked, we thought we'd break 50 in Q1, and it was either going to be February or March. I think it's going to be January or February at this point. I would have said January, except January is a kind of a unique month. It's not a big manufacturing month. Seasonal factors come into play quite a bit. And it remains to be seen what that will do to our PMI number, raw data in January. So I think for sure February we're going to break 50, and we could break it, with a point or two with some margin. So, and to you, I think you made the point, Dan, that we do now have clarity on the election, and it's becoming clearer and clearer every day the stark difference between what a Democratic administration would have done for us and what a Republican administration will do for us from the standpoint of economic growth. I think the fact that the Tax Cut and Job Act activity around personal interest rate, personal tax rates, it's going to stay in place through 25, 26, 27. Republicans own that tax cut law in 2017. They will maintain that, and they're going to maintain it without a corresponding increase to tax rates on the higher end earners, most likely. So I think that's positive from the standpoint of business. The negative piece is more on the tariff talk, and I think at present that's really talk. It's not an idle threat because we know this administration has used tariffs before, and they're more of a believer now in tariffs, so they're more inclined to use them more. But I think is the one that's facing us near term here, and he's teed up on Mexico and Canada, our biggest trading partners. I think you can already see in the space of 5 days how it went from, in the case of Mexico, from a defensive posture to a more accommodative posture. And I think they've kind of realized that Trump wants to work something different. He wants us to help guard the U.S. border, help guard our own borders. And he has done that successfully in the past. And my guess is that he'll do it again successfully. This time he's done it with the threat of tariffs, which I think he won't put in place on Mexico and Canada. So, we're back to a bigger fight with China, which will take some time to kind of work itself out. But this is a very positive report. I'm going to say that it probably accelerates my predictions by about a month. There's a lot of good stuff here, like demand. Now, the demand breaking 50, there could be a tariff activity at play here. It's kind of become clear as the last couple of days have come on. We could have buyers actually accelerating deliveries in advance of potential tariffs. I know if I was sitting in a buying desk, I'd bring that to management. And if they had the cash, the funds, they would probably approve it just to be safe, to maintain your cost structure through the first half of next year, accelerate as many deliveries as you can before tariffs hit. So I think that's probably happening. We'll see that really in the import number in December and January. It's not showing up this month, but it probably will start to show up. That's the first thing that you would do is accelerate deliveries. That could explain a slight growth in the inventory count, and it could explain the growth in the new order count. But absent of that, I think what we have here is we have a more optimism in the business community. They're willing to place more orders because they don't see as much risk in the future, and they're willing to invest more in working capital so that they can satisfy their customer needs better and capture that demand as it shows up quicker. And therefore, you have the manufacturing inventory count growing to 48.1.
Yeah. You just touched on the two questions I had here on my list. So let's drill down into those for a little bit. The first one was on the demand indexes, and then we'll talk about inventories in a bit. The demand indexes, you mentioned new orders and new export orders. Those were up a combined 6.5 percentage points. Customers' inventories at a just right level. The backlog was still not great. And just for note's sake, only the new orders index directly feeds into the PMI. The other three don't. But yeah, just talk about those demand indexes and just the overall picture for November.
Yeah, so it kind of shows a transition. And the reason I'm saying that is the customer inventory is about right. So what companies are saying is that I was able to satisfy my customers' needs in the last month. I didn't under-deliver and I didn't over-deliver. Okay, so that's it's in the middle. It's kind of neutral. At just right number, I would say that's positive. The only negative number here is a backlog. And we've been saying for a long time that backlog going back into expansion is probably going to take some time, because right now the panelist companies have the capacity to turn around orders quicker. So stuff won't end up in backlog as quickly as you would expect in a normal environment. They got to fill their order books, and they're going to satisfy as much demand as they can, hence the inventory count going up. So I don't think we're going to see backlog really grow until the end of Q1, maybe even Q2. We might see a 50, 52, but we're not going to see 55, 56 probably until Q2. So demand seems to be coming back very early post-election to really claim that, but there are some pretty decent signs here. The sentiment around demand went to 1-to-1. We haven't had that level of sentiment since May, June. And in the May-June timeframe, it was declining to 1-to-1. In this case, it's actually growing to an improvement of 1-to-1, which I think is good. And on the employment side, supporting that, the employment side, last month we were 1 to 3 in terms of force reductions. So for every 4 people giving me comments, 3 of them were releasing people. This month it's 1 to 1.5. So for every 2.5 people giving me comments, only 1.5 are releasing people. That's a 50% improvement. So they're either stopping the reduction plans because of future potential growth, or they've met their goals for the close of 2024, and they're ready to stay stable. We'll see what happens in December and January, but I think that's a positive sign too, that layoff activity seems to be diminishing. Like I said, it's either because they hit their targets or they've decided to revise their targets given the current environment. I mean, the Republican administration, like I said, the Tax Cuts and Job Acts will remain, pretty sure. Let's not underestimate the potential impact on regulatory reform, which tends to slow everything down, make everything difficult for a lot of good reasons. But clearly, this administration is going to attack regulatory issues and try to speed up the length of decision making in the bureaucracy. And I think that's a good thing for business overall, at least business growth. And I think you're seeing the reflection of that. That's the first feeling. The negative here, like we've said, is the tariffs, and it's going to remain to be seen. I don't know if I've mentioned it yet, but clearly the business community has said that I would much rather deal with demand today because I need to refill my order books. I'll worry about inflation tomorrow, when and if it does show up.
Yeah. And let's moving on to inventories, which you also touched on in your overview. You had mentioned 2 dynamics that probably should flesh out a little bit. Obviously, there were some signs that maybe companies are a little bit more willing to invest now, And, I was going to ask you, I mean, is there any sign? You kind of mentioned it earlier, and I noticed that there was one respondent comment on this in the report, maybe about stocking up a little bit to maybe get ahead of potential tariff increases, just to, discuss those dynamics.
Right. So remember now, tariffs are coming from overseas imports. So our import number really didn't go up, which if the import number had been 51, 52, that would really support the inventory count growing because people are accelerating deliveries because tariffs are coming.
Mm-hmm.
So there's probably some of that, but I think that probably the bigger piece, it's a level of confidence in the future. Mm-hmm. So, we converted from a profit growth year, 2024, that we entered the year thinking profitability was number one, liquidity number two. By the time we hit the summer, it was clear that profitability wasn't the number one issue. It was liquidity, because we were headed for a harder landing. And then when the Fed cut their interest rates in September, there's a little bit of easing, but still an unwillingness to invest in manufacturing inventory because the future was still uncertain. So, now that the election is behind us, we're on a rate reduction profile as of September. There's more certainty, I think. And what you're seeing here, companies are willing to invest more in working capital. And as a result, they're taking in more deliveries from their suppliers in anticipation of a decent grow out in Q1. So I think it's more that they're taking more deliveries from all their suppliers to restock in preparation for Q1 growth. You want to capture that sale as soon as you can. And with a declining order book, you don't have these long lead times you can work on stuff. So orders are now coming in. You want to satisfy them as quickly as possible. The only way to do that is to have inventory. And that's probably why our manufacturing inventory account is in its best position that it's been in the last 4 months.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned in an interview earlier today that, and you kind of alluded it to a moment ago when you talked about demand today versus potential inflation tomorrow. Tariffs, companies, sentiment is that they'll work through them. I mean, and the difference between now and 2018 is that, at least their companies should at least have a playbook on it. Just talk about how they plan to, deal with those possibilities moving forward.
Well, we've had a bunch of activity over the last 8 or so years about reshoring and minimizing supply chain risk. We had the tariff issue in 2018, I think, 2017, 2018. Mm-hmm. And we had the pandemic shock. Obviously, these long supply chains were a hindrance to recovery, to satisfying the need. Supply managers have been actively looking at other supply routes, including redundancy in supply bases to have more than one supplier. So we've had plenty of time to get ready for this. I think it's in combination with bringing business back to the U.S. I think that's a lot more uncertain than supply chain assurance through multiple sources from multiple locations. I think that's been going on. So when Republicans say they're going to tariff almost everything, that's probably to address everything, probably an effort to bring more back to the U.S. But we're still faced with the issue that if you bring it back to the U.S., it's likely going to cost more. And if it's going to cost more, it's going to take 6 to 9 months to show up in yours and my prices, but it's going to cost more. Our labor cost is higher. Our cost to operate here is higher. So if you're in a highly competitive business, that's not a good thing. If you're in a technically competitive business where price isn't the number one factor, then okay, supply assurance is going to override that. And maybe you will bring business back to the U.S. But as I've said many times, it's more than just putting a factory up and putting people in it. There's a whole activity that needs to occur here about how are we going to deal with management and labor. And I think the first example of that is going to be the mid-January East Coast longshoremen renegotiating with the marine terminals again. So here it is, they're going to do that during the Biden administration, who has been definitely pro-labor. But a week later, Trump administration is going to take over. So I would think that we're probably looking at maybe a week or two worth of stops. And it wouldn't surprise me if the Trump administration orders them back to work. So that kind of happens. That sends a signal that labor, you have a position here, but you don't have the strongest position like you had under the Biden administration. And we'll see where that leads to, because bringing back business into the U.S. into unionized labor is not going to settle well in the economy overall.
Yeah. our viewers can consider the issue of inside supply management, which I definitely talked to Tim about more, but I'm going to ask him now. Are tariffs just a fact of life, for companies now? As we've talked about a lot, many of the pre-2021 levies that were put in by the Trump administration, Joe Biden never campaigned on getting rid of them, and he's kept a lot of them, and some have been added since then. So is this just something, this is just part of the environment that companies have to work through now?
Well, I mean, everybody, keeps their ear tuned to what's being said, and future President Trump has been very clear that this is something he loves. So we'll see. I think tariffs with China is here to stay. I think it's wrapped up into a much bigger deal that's going to take a long time to resolve. I think tariffs overall across everybody, I don't see that as a long-term solution. Personally, I don't. But I think the arguments that we're having with China and the way we've done business with them over the last 25 years has got to change. We haven't really done any change in the last 4 years. President Biden did leave the tariffs in place, added some on EVs coming from China, but he really didn't do anything to change the relationship with China. And I think you're going to see the Republican administration do more around that. And my personal feeling is, having done a lot of business over there, we need to change the relationship. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about, we touched on the new export orders index a little bit earlier, but I mean, you've talked about for months the impact of sluggish economies overseas, how that's impacted there. And China and Japan have been among the countries that have done some stimulus, and Germany is heavily debating it. The index did take up in November. How much of that is a good sign? And, can we point to any of the actions taken overseas that might have had an impact, or is it just too soon?
Well, U.S. manufacturing, about 15 to 18% of its output is export oriented. I think China's PMI, its official PMI, is now at a 50 and some change for the second straight month. So it kind of says it's stable. There is activity in China to open up the economy again. They're trying to stimulate it. It's been in place for at least a month, maybe a little bit longer. We'll see where that goes. But my biggest concern, though, is really Germany, still sitting at a 42, 43 PMI for a long time. And that's the economic engine for Europe, especially the manufacturing engine. It is very much tied to China. And I think this whole U.S.-China relationship is impacting German ability to grow with China. And we'll see where all that kind of works out. But Germany is a strong engine, probably a large buyer of product from the U.S. That's weak. Our number is probably up a little bit, probably from China. I can't tell you for sure, but it's probably from China and not from Germany. We need to see Germany come back, but I'm not sure how it's going to do that without China's support. And right now, it really doesn't have it. So.
Okay. Yeah. Last month at this time, we discussed how much October was a challenging month with the impact from the hurricanes and the strike at Boeing and some other labor turbulence. How much of the data, as you look at it across from November, can be considered maybe a rebound from that? And, just from that standpoint, how encouraging was the month overall, considering some of the challenges that the manufacturing sector faced in the previous month?
So I like to really focus on the big six industry sectors. And we've had two of those industry sectors that have been expanding at decent rates. Food and beverage and computer and electronic products have been expanding for 2 or 3 months. Food and beverage a little bit longer. At think 52, 54. The problem has been chemical products, and it's been transportation equipment. Those are number one and number two industry sector. They were both contracting at less than 45. Now they still are, but they're not contracting at the level that they were last month. They're showing contraction rates improving, but still below 45. So, until the chemical products area jumps back up to 48 to 52, I can't really say that we're definitely on a growth profile. Yeah. But I do think that in the next couple of months, we'll see chemical products get back up to 52, 53. And hopefully the transportation equipment area will follow somewhat. We need that to get back up to 48, 49 at least. But the fundamental problem with transportation equipment is that people are not buying cars, and they're not buying cars because they're too expensive. They're too expensive because the price is like 20% more than what it was pre-pandemic, which puts a lot of cars out of the affordability range for Americans. And the interest rate to finance them has been too high. The two of those together is forcing people to wait. So we have interest rates coming down now, but most likely that coming down will end probably in January, where it kind of appears, and I wouldn't surprise me, where the Federal Reserve is going to sit and wait to see what the Trump administration does from the standpoint of fiscal policy. They're not going to act in advance. They're going to wait. They've been saying that we're fact-based, so they're not going to act on statements. They're going to act on facts. So I don't think we're going to see an inflation really hit the U.S. if it does until maybe the second half of the year. It might start to reappear in April, May. I don't think we'll be able to declare that it's on the wrong track until probably May or June. So in the meantime, somehow we need to stimulate people to start buying cars again, because the automotive guys, as you can see, there's a bunch of turmoil in the automotive sector, whether it's a U.S. company or company selling product in the U.S. Not a good environment for cars. We need it to come back. I think cars are overall, including the service piece of it, are 13 or 14% of U.S. total GDP. What's being impacted now is the OEM side, which is about 50% of about 16% of manufacturing GDP. So it's not insignificant. We need it to come back, no doubt. And the transportation equipment sector impacts a whole bunch of other industry sectors: chemicals, primary metals, fabricated metal products. It filters into a lot of other stuff. So if cars come back and people are able to afford them, maybe they're feeling more confident that their own wages are going to grow, that the economy is growing, therefore let's go ahead and make that investment. We need car sales to come back for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned the Fed and interest rates in that answer, and I know you had said after the rate cuts were announced that the impact on the manufacturing sector probably wouldn't be felt until Q1 of 2025 at the soonest. And I had seen some reports recently that the real estate sector, which I know is not manufacturing, it's services. It's something I'll discuss with Steve Miller on Wednesday. But the gratification from the interest rates cuts has been delayed. The impact is taking a lot longer than maybe they thought. Just based on that, do you still hold to your initial assessment? Are the rate cuts, the impact there, taking about as long as I might have expected for the manufacturing sector, or maybe has it been a little bit slower or faster?
No, I would still stick with that. The issue now is that there's a bit of a tailwind here with fiscal policy. So fiscal policy is definitely going to support growth. I think we're still on that trajectory for sure. I think that the challenge for Chairman Powell is going to be to maintain stable pricing. I think he's going to move pretty close to neutral, which is where you'd think you'd want to be. If we can get to neutral and stay at neutral for a year and a half, that would be good. That neutral rate is probably higher now than what it had been when we spent 15 years at 2% GDP growth and 2% inflation rate. I think the neutral rate is higher now. So I don't think they're as far off on the neutral rate as it would appear to be. They don't need to get back. They're not going to get back down to 2%. We're probably talking high threes. So, and people realize, hey, this is the best it's going to be. If we're going to, at some point that car wears out, you got to replace it. It's a timing issue. So, but the Fed's going to run into stimulus, and I think that there's going to be stimulus in the Trump administration for sure. He's going to want 2 to 3% GDP growth, and right now we're sitting at, I think, 2.4, 2.6 was a Q3 number. Second time around. I mean, if you look at the whole year, we're probably sitting at a 2.5% GDP growth so far year to date. So another 2.5% GDP growth in 2025 would be very good. That's obviously stronger growth because it's compounding. So I don't see the Trump administration coming in an austerity environment. That's not the projections that they are laying out, and which means that there's going to be more pressure on inflation. And I think I mentioned this earlier on, that the business community has decided that let's deal with demand first, growth, And if inflation comes, we'll deal with that when it comes. In the meantime, let's do what we know. And now the stock market may not see it the same way, but the stock market is totally different from operational issues and manufacturing. So, and keep that in mind. They're two different animals. Stock market is looking a year ahead. They're more sensitive to rate structures, quarter point moves, and manufacturing is really looking for an accommodative business environment to go ahead and make lower risk investments in equipment and people and inventory and so forth.
Yeah. This is about the time where I ask you if there's anything that we haven't talked about or that I forgot to ask that you think might be important, but I'll phrase it in this way. You were asked earlier in an interview about the last time the new orders index was in expansion. That was in March. And I thought you made a really good point when you discussed about that time. It looked like the manufacturing sector was, coming out of the trial, and, that turned out not to be the case. It was going to last a few more months. Anything in this set of data? I know you've elucidated throughout this broadcast, but anything that you'd like to add, that might suggest a more positive outlook, and that the manufacturing recovery is indeed imminent.
Yeah, you're right. We saw in January, February, based on our forecast in December, that 2024 was going to be a growth year, a strong growth year. It started to get very questionable in the March. It started to get questionable in the March timeframe when prices, inflation, kind of turned around and started to head the wrong way. Then it got very concerning in the May-June timeframe when our output, really dropped. We had to step down production. So there's so much confusion going on here because in 2025 it's going to be very confusing. So you have all this stimulus money through tax credits and grants and stuff on the EV side. That's going to be reassessed. What's that going to do to the electric vehicle market? I don't think that's the biggest issue in automotive right now. I think the biggest issue is really affordability of internal combustion engine cars. It's not so much acceptance of electric vehicles. I think that's going to diminish. The whole tariff issue is going to cause a bunch of confusion. We're going to go through 6 to 9 months of difficult to analyze activity because you've got multiple variables all factoring in. It's going to be hard to pin it on one thing. And then the Fed's going to step in at some point and say, hey, I'm seeing inflation showing up here in April. And, therefore I'm going to raise rates. And what will that do? So it's going to be really entertaining. I think it's going to be a great year to be watching business. With the Fed on a rate reduction profile that's now probably in question because the fiscal policies are more inflationary. You got tariffs that we dealt with once, but those tariffs were not across everything. This time there's a threat that they will be. I don't think that they will be, but the threat will be there. And then we have the global conflicts that are continuing to impact people around the world, where the U.S. is the protector of a lot of those countries. And, we have munitions and armaments that we need to provide. And, we'll see how that impacts everything. So there are so many variables at play here, Dan, in 2025. It's hard to look out beyond Q1, but I think we're in a much better position right now than we were a month ago. And I think from the business standpoint, it's positive. And I think we couldn't ask for much more. I think we're set up for a growth profile starting in January. And we'll see what that profile looks like. My first reaction would be it's going to look like the last time Trump was in control in 2017 through 2019. We went through a 24 to 26 month period of pretty good growth, sustainable. Not too jerky. We spent a bunch of time at fairly high PMI levels, high 50s. We did some time over 60. Nothing like the post-pandemic grow out, but still it was a good economic growth cycle. I call it the Obama-Trump cycle because Obama kind of had started it, and Trump stepped in and was there when it actually showed up. So, we'll see. 2025 is going to be a really interesting economic year for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue to mark your calendars for December 16th, when ISM releases its supply chain planning forecast for the manufacturing and services sectors for 2025. That's a valuable report that will detail recent performance and, perhaps more important, panelist sentiments for the coming year. And also join us on December 18th when I'll join Tim and Steve Miller. He's the chair of ISM Services Business Survey Committee for a LinkedIn Live broadcast to break it all down. And for more information, feel free to go to ismworld.org, or in a little bit, you can read our roundup article that details a lot of what we discussed here. And join us on Wednesday when we talk about the Services PMI with Steve Miller, the chair of ISM's Business Services Business Survey Committee. And if you'd like to be a part of the panels that determine the data for the ISM Manufacturing Services or Hospital Report on Business, go to ismworld.org/join the panel for more information. And so for Tim Fiore and some people who helped us behind the scenes today, Christina Cahill and Jennifer Stevens, my name is Dan Zeiger. We'll see you on Wednesday.